Welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's MDM Webcast, 5 Ways Artificial Intelligence Can Improve Distribution Business Today. Our 60-minute program is sponsored by Epicor. My name is Elizabeth Galentine, Editor-in-Chief of Modern Distribution Management and website mdm.com. I have the pleasure of moderating today's program. Key to leveraging the power of AI today and into the future is ensuring distributors have the right technology in place, including interactive user experience and mobile access to data. With that, I'm delighted to welcome today's speaker, MDM's own Ian Heller, President and Chief Operating Officer. Also with him is MDM CEO Tom Gale, who is joining us as well. Welcome, Ian and Tom.
Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So I want to also thank Epicor, who sponsored today's webinar. They are really known for specializing in ERPs in distribution, among other industries. Very good at managing complexity. And a lot of people know them because of their products, Epicor Profit 21 and Epicor Eclipse. They're really focused on growth. I think they talk about how their own priority is around helping their customers grow. And a recent American Express open research project said that small business owners say that growth is their top priority. And of course, the Gartner survey of CEOs and senior executives said the same thing. And the needs of those organizations vary, and Epicor provides some flexible solutions. As you can see, they're very well penetrated across distribution verticals. No matter which list of top distributors you look at, a very large percentage of them rely on Epicor as their ERP. Okay, so Epicor provided this definition of artificial intelligence, and we're going to dive deeper and look at some other sort of more expanded definitions as well. But I think simply stated, AI is a concept that refers to a computer's ability to perform tasks and make decisions that would historically require some level of human intelligence. So, let's jump in a little bit to what that means. And I'm going to start by using an example. Way back in 1997, there was a big breakthrough in technology when IBM's Deep Blue computer beat the world champion at chess, Garry Kasparov. And as impressive as that was not AI. Essentially what IBM did is they consulted with a bunch of chess experts, and then they hard-coded calculations by hand into the machine. Now, interestingly, chess is what's called a finite game. There are only a limited number of moves that are possible. I mean, it may be tens or hundreds, probably millions of different possibilities, but it is a finite game, meaning you can calculate the probabilities for every move depending on every configuration on the board. And that's more or less what they did. It's not quite that simple, but it's close to what it is. But IBM Deep Blue was programmed to play chess extremely well, but it did not learn how to play the game. The game was programmed into it. It was never going to get better at it on its own. And so one of the programmers for Deep Blue was quoted as saying, "It is not an artificial intelligence project in any way." Now let's contrast that to something that happened just a year or two ago when a Google project, a software system called AlphaGo, beat the 18-time world champion at the game of Go, which is considered vastly more complex than chess, in part because it's an infinite game. There's literally no limit to the number of moves that can be played. And so what they did with AlphaGo was they just fed it the historical data of games played by average Go players and then set the machine loose to play against itself millions and millions and millions of times. And AlphaGo learned how to play Go on its own, and it got to a level where it beat the world champion. It achieved something called like level 9 Go status, which is the highest status you can get. And one observer said, AlphaGo dazzled its opponents with creative moves, one of which overturned hundreds of years of Go wisdom. So there's a big difference here because IBM Deep Blue can only play chess. It was programmed to play chess at a certain level. It was not going to improve. It did not learn how to play chess. AlphaGo learned on its own how to play Go, to a level that really probably no one has ever achieved. And then they have subsequent versions of AlphaGo that play it even better, but they learn on their own, and they actually display what we would consider to be intuition and creativity in their strategies in playing the game. So that's a pretty clear way, I think, of understanding the difference between advanced technology on the left and artificial intelligence on the right. Now, Dr. Michael Wu at the software company Pros categorizes AI into 4 different types. He's got internet AI, which is, familiar to us who shop online, through recommendation engines, and if you're like me and you sometimes shop on Amazon, or like a lot of people, you shop on Amazon every day, you feel like they know your taste and interests better than you do. And as, whatever my hobbies happen to be at the time, photography or whatever, it feels like they're recommending things that I didn't know existed that I now cannot live without, because it studied my history and it personalizes recommendations to me. A lot of people have that experience. There's perceptual AI, and this is things like voice ordering and image recognition, where either a camera and software or a microphone and software are analyzing images or words and turning them into product data attributes so they can match them to specific SKUs. There's autonomous AI, and these are systems that allow autonomous vehicles to operate on their own. So in distribution, that's often warehouse robots and delivery drones. And delivery drones are not a future thing in China. There's a company there called JD.com that's been doing drone deliveries across 100 routes since 2013, and they are fully autonomous drones. They put in an address, or it's probably a longitude, latitude place, and the drone goes there on its own and delivers the package. They also have fully autonomous vehicles operating there, et cetera. But autonomous AI is a series of systems that allows these machines to detect terrain and to navigate. In the case of the warehouse robots, navigate around each other and around a distribution center, and to figure out what size spots they need to put their loads into, et cetera. And delivery drones obviously have to avoid traffic and birds and chimneys and power lines, et cetera. And these systems combine to enable that, just like they do in an autonomous car. Business AI is the kind of stuff that is really enabling better levels of performance for things that distributors have been doing for a long time. So that might be forecasting inventory, detecting fraud, or making better pricing decisions. So I think it's useful to look at these 4 categories, and we can next look at them applied more to distribution.
Ian, why is it important to look at these 4 categories discretely? What's the consequence for a distributor if they just try to apply one of these sort of across different areas?
Yeah, I think it's kind of like any complex topic. First of all, you have to have a general understanding of it, and then you have to get into deeper levels in order to apply it. Like I spent most of my career in marketing. Well, marketing is very different if you're talking about advertising versus marketing automation via email versus SEO versus branding. And if you don't understand how, sort of the structure of the discipline underneath the heading, then you really can't apply it in an intelligent way. And frankly, people misapply it. You have people who will spend a lot of money on branding in a market where that's not very important. And I think, similarly in AI, if you're going to get to a level of expertise, you first of all need to understand the basics about what AI is, which I find a lot of people don't. And then you need to get into the individual categories, because the reality is that in many cases, these things all work together. You may have a system where you are forecasting inventory more intelligently, and then that's affecting your distribution plan, and you may even change your internet recommendations based on what you have in stock or what you've gotten a good price on. So you can't understand them individually without defining the categories well, and you can't coordinate how they work together without getting to a deeper level of understanding.
Great, thank you.
Okay, internet AI. So there are distributors using this on their websites, and what this is taking into account, generally speaking, is data on previous purchases, consumer preferences, demographics, and interestingly, and you've probably noticed this in your own life, the more you use the site, the better the recommendations come, because you're providing a bigger data set for the AI to be doing calculations with, so it can arrive at better answers. And that means that as your users come on your website, if you have any AI-enabled technology in particular, those user experiences will get more personalized over time. I mean, one of the things we've always talked about in marketing is, sending relevant offers to customers. You want to send them things that they're interested in. You don't want to offer them things that aren't applicable to them. And this drives much greater relevance than we've seen in the past, just because you have more data and it's data from individuals. So we'll go into some use cases here later on how some distributors apply these. But generally speaking, for the most part, Internet AI is used as a recommender engine on websites. Perceptual AI, so this is voice and image recognition, and this is becoming pretty familiar to us thanks to mobile phones and smart speakers, where they become more and more human-sounding in their interactions. There was even a demonstration of Cortana talking to Google or something like that, and the two devices were having a conversation with each other. What's interesting is a lot of people have the Amazon app on their phone, and they don't know that these technologies are built in there today. So if you do have the Amazon app, you should open it up. If you don't, you should probably download it to at least demo this technology. And in the top right, there's a camera icon, and you can click on that and point it at an ordinary object, and it actually even today does a pretty good job recognizing that item and then taking you to the Buy It Now page. You can also describe an item by voice, and this is not just in your smartphone. This is also built into their Echo speakers with Alexa. This is going to be a bigger deal in the future where there's more and more voice ordering because it's very efficient. I mean, you think about in your personal life, usually when you run out of toothpaste, you're not near your computer. But if you just say, Alexa, order me 3 tubes of Crest, then you're done, and it's going to be there. Well, based on what they've announced yesterday, it's probably going to be there tomorrow. These are very powerful technologies, and I think you have to imagine the level of sophistication you need to do this. I mean, many distributors struggle with just ordinary product data. How do I organize my PIM? And how do I gather data? How do I fully attribute SKUs? Well, not only has Amazon all done that, but they've overlaid these machine learning algorithms, which is what enables AI, so that they can actually translate images and voice into product attributes. I mean, the power behind it is amazing, and the technology behind it is amazing. And consumers more and more are going to want to use this. I mean, you can imagine a day when a superintendent's walking around on a job site with Alexa-enabled goggles and can just look at an item and say, Alexa, I don't know what that is, but if you do, order me 10 of it. And Alexa will be able to, in many cases, figure that out. And if she doesn't get it right the first time, maybe he'll turn over the package so that she can see the label, and the next time she'll figure it out without that. That's what AI does. But in the Amazon case, these will take you to the product listings, and it's a very convenient way to buy. And all this stuff is in a very rudimentary place right now, but these AI engines are, for these kinds of applications, are getting stronger and stronger. There's a company called NVIDIA that makes computer systems for autonomous cars, and their current state-of-the-art system can do 320 trillion operations per second. Now, today that's a $129,000 computer, but I predict a year from now it'll be on Amazon Prime for about $700. Okay, autonomous AI, these are when machines operate on their own. We covered this a little bit, but it's all kind of interesting developments here. They're talking about platooning cars into virtual trains, and that those train lanes may replace the express lanes or high occupancy lanes on freeways, and they can calculate the potential throughput of existing infrastructure when you build that kind of efficiency into it. And of course, people are familiar with Tesla and the potential of these vehicles, which is all happening much faster than anyone predicted. But Amazon primarily today uses this in robots. So they, this was from several months ago, supposedly had over 100,000 warehouse robots in service in their distribution centers. And so they're, bringing the labor rate down quickly in those distribution centers. Earlier in this conversation, I mentioned JD.com in China, which is a very, very advanced retailer. And they actually have a warehouse, a distribution center that processes a couple of 100,000 SKUs a day with 4 human employees, and the rest of it's automated. So you can imagine if you can put a scale of volume through that, how efficient that operation becomes, and frankly, how accurate and reliable it becomes, because this AI, it may make a mistake occasionally, but it learns and then doesn't make that mistake again typically. And over time, the productivity throughput and the accuracy levels are just much higher than you can do with human beings. Okay, business AI, this is where you're just making smarter decisions with data. This is most frequently used by distributors in terms of pricing recommendations, and we'll go into a use case here about that later on, but you can get much better decisions and build margins by pricing smarter, and those algorithms get better and smarter over time without you having to intervene. So that, this is getting back to the Deep Blue versus the AlphaGo example, right? I mean, you might have pricing software today, but unless somebody makes an update, it doesn't get better at its task on its own. Pricing software of the future, and there are vendors who have this built in today, actually learns and gets smarter about pricing on an ongoing fashion. And then fraud detection. So for example, you might have 10 branches in a city, but you have cameras, and the AI may detect that the same individual has walked into 3 different locations without making a purchase. Well, typically, security systems are confined to a single location. But with AI, that camera may send an alert to asset protection to say, this person's displaying suspicious behavior. We don't know if he's casing us for robbery later, or maybe breaking in at night, but this is not the behavior we expect to see from customers. And that, rather than a security guard sitting in front of 20 screens trying to remember the space coming up before, AI will say, hey, there's a problem here, and connect the dots and notify the security person that they should follow up. So these are just amazing capabilities that are coming.
It's interesting, Ian. It was just this morning in the paper. Walmart, or it may have been a few weeks ago. Walmart actually is putting in some pilot stores cameras to take over a lot of the functions in terms of inventory checking, replenishment, all of these types of things, and really, they're fairly far along with this based on the article. It's really interesting how quickly this is really accelerating.
Yeah, we're gonna show an example of how that technology is applied. That type of technology is applied in distribution here in a little while. Okay, so there are really 6 areas we're going to talk about: the sales enablement, marketing, pricing, working capital, warehouse and delivery operations, and asset protection. So let me kind of jump in. So sales growth and enablement, one of the ways that this is really going to help distributors who tend to have a lot of sales reps is with a voice-directed virtual agent. So Epicor's got something called the Epicor Virtual Agent coming soon as one example. Easy to do by voice. So this sales assistant is connected to your ERP, and you can check product and price and availability. You can get a quote. You might get account triggers based on sales trends. Hey, somebody just placed a big order, or there's a new account in your territory that placed an order, or somebody just made a big return, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can this kind of technology can also help understand what customer frequency what contact frequency, what sales frequency customers seem to want. What's the trend of frequency, which may be branch visits, outbound calls from the branch, account manager visits, emails, et cetera, tends to optimize their sales with, because you don't want to annoy them, but you want to communicate with them. And of course, there are tremendous cross-selling and upselling opportunities because you can use a wide variety of internal and external data to try to figure out what this kind of customer might want to buy. So for example, a lot of distributors will build scorecards to say, well, this type of customer usually buys, $1,000 of this kind of product per employee and $2,000 worth of this product for this kind of employee, et cetera. And then they compare that to what the customer's really buying, and they say, well, here's the gap. Well, what if that data was updated in real time as you analyze transactions every day, and you could calculate it for new products and new product categories and new customers based on data that you bring together? That would be much more valuable to account managers than just a backward look in a static calculation. Okay, in marketing, there's some really intriguing stuff going on. So marketing automation has been around for a while, although frankly there's a pretty small percentage of distributors that have implemented it in any robust fashion. And in marketing automation, particularly with trigger campaigns, what that means is you are sending out an offer in response to some data point. One example is, and a very common example, and frankly a place to start that doesn't require AI, is for distributors to send email offers out on products that are related to something the customer bought the day before. So if your customer bought an air compressor, it's not that hard to put together a database that says, well, the 10 most common items bought with an air compressor are this air hose and this tool and this extension cord and this filter dryer or whatever. It's not that hard to develop that list, and either with your delivery confirmation or your receipt or in a separate email, you say, thanks for buying air compressor XYZ. Here are 5 products you might need with it. And the click-through rates and sales rates on those kinds of campaigns are really high. And that's just data that you already have, and it's a process to put it all together. But imagine if, and this is actually real, right? Imagine if you can do things like better prospect scoring and segmentation. So AI can evaluate all of your customers and all your transactions, and you can build in third-party data from Dun & Bradstreet or whoever, and you can start understanding the sales potential by customer and even by products within that customer through dynamic scoring that updates on a regular basis as you gain transaction history. You can also reduce the application of discounting. Like a lot of times, when you do marketing promotions, you always just assume there's going to be a certain number of people who would have bought the product anyway, but you don't know that, so you make the offer to them even though they were probably going to buy it, and you'll lose the margin that's built into the discount. Well, AI can help you figure out which of those customers would have likely bought. You don't have to offer it to them. A really valuable way of using AI is an omni-channel attribution. So, we've probably all been in these discussions, or a lot of people have been, where, you do a product campaign, and the sales department says, hey, we increased sales 10%, and the marketing department says, yeah, but our emails had X click rate, we increased sales by 15%, and then the people who run the branches say, yeah, but we had all this stuff on display, we grew the sales 20%, and you add it all up, and well, the campaign only provided a 10% lift, but people were claiming 60% worth of benefit. That's because that's kind of swim lane attribution. It's hard to reconcile because all of those points may have indeed played a factor. And how do you understand the combination of the contribution of the display merchandising, the outside rep, and the marketing campaigns? And there's some really interesting applications happening right now in auto dealers where they are looking at every individual dealer as a test location. And they can say, well, the road that this is next to this dealer gets X amount of traffic. The billboards there are getting this kind of exposure. We ran these television ads. We ran these radio ads. We had, these emails go out, and X number of newspaper inserts, which are still a thing for cars. And if you have enough of those tests happening and in enough different locations that have different variables, over time you can actually recommend a mix of those marketing tools that maximizes your return. And I don't think distributors are ready for that yet, but I think beginning to get more sophisticated in omni-channel attribution and beginning to introduce some of this AI-driven analytics will help them take first steps towards that. The other thing you can do is you can apply external data. So this Google AdWords Bid by Weather is a real API that's out there. This is just a screenshot that I took of that tool. And so, imagine how you can use this. You know what the weather is going to be, or the weathermen are usually wrong, but they're probably righter than a random guess. And so over the next week, if you know that there's going to be a cold snap in Boston, then maybe you think about pricing differently, right? So I'm going to have a higher demand for heaters. I'm going to raise my prices. Not saying that that's a cool thing to do, but a lot of people do. Or maybe I start moving some inventory there, right? And I might be able to optimize my sales in these markets by allowing AI to get access to this external information and start making inventory recommendations across many of these types of variables and many different locations across thousands of SKUs. And a person could never forecast that very well, but the AI can do it pretty effortlessly. Okay, pricing and profitability. So we talked a little bit about this, but you can do dynamic pricing based on customer attributes, but you can also do things like dynamic pricing based on lost sales. Now, we were never able to measure lost sales well back when I was, running marketing at different places. But that's because unless somebody bought something, we didn't know that they were thinking about buying something. But now with internet tracking, you know exactly what people are looking at on your website, meaning that if you have a lot of people looking at a SKU but they're not buying it, you can evaluate the pricing, and if you want to, maybe you have a little extra stock or you're just trying to grow your sales, you can start lowering the pricing on those SKUs that people are looking at but not buying. The reality is that I don't know if this technology exists today, but I'm sure it will soon exist, that you will be able to know what people are calling in and asking about and then not buying without the phone agent being expected to mark that, oh yeah, it's something I lost this sale. Because that's how we tried to do it, was have people hand code lost sales, and it just doesn't work. You can also do pricing to configuration, so you might have items that you can change the specifications on or add accessories to, or maybe you do some kitting, and there are various firms that offer these configuration engines, and the pricing will update dynamically. You can also do it based on external data, like you might, if you buy a lot of rebar, you might decide that, hey, I'm going to start bringing in futures pricing on steel, both imported and domestic, and I'm going to factor that into my pricing because I think the price is going to go up or down dramatically. And I might make some purchasing decisions about that as well, based on how I see those prices changing. And by the way, this is another place where weather can come in, like I mentioned. I would say the other thing is that very few marketing companies, except at really big distribution corporations, do a really good job laying out marketing campaigns and doing good measurements. And what I found over the years is if you do that, you get more co-op support from your supplier. That co-op is typically not dedicated to any particular distributor, at least not all of it is, and you can get a disproportionate share if you can do things like this that are clearly impressive and effective. Okay, so let's look at a few specific use cases. So if you look at working capital, which is primarily inventory and accounts receivable, there are a couple things. One is, like I said, you can do better forecasting of your stock if you use weather forecasts, but you might also use something like housing starts. If you expose AI to these data sets, they will get better over time at understanding how to make those affect your inventory forecast than a human being could. And they can do dynamic updating of forecasting models themselves. So not just the predictions that are coming out of the models, they can make the models themselves more accurate over time without you having to think through the math and do it yourself. In terms of accounts receivable, I thought this was kind of an interesting use case that I ran across. There's a lot of effort spent collecting money from customers because, for most distributors, a very large portion of their sales goes out on credit. But with AI, one simple thing you can do is you can ask the system, hey, rank these customers on the likelihood of them paying via me making a short phone call versus me, having to send them to collections and incurring legal fees and delays. If you do that, then you can maybe, collect some low-hanging fruit in terms of your receivables just because the AI tells you where to spend your phone time. Okay, warehouse and delivery operations. So this is a picture out of a video on the left by a company called Zebra Technologies. A lot of us know them from their bar scanners. But they've got this new system called SmartPack, which is really interesting because SmartPack actually measures dimensions of products as they're coming down a conveyor system, for example. And then this camera, which looks like an LCD projector, is mounted in the dock area, and that's actually analyzing the truck. It does a bunch of other things too, but it's actually analyzing the truck, and it's telling the loader where to load it so that you can cube out as much of the truck as possible. Now, these systems are also used in warehouses. You were talking about the Walmart example earlier, but imagine the potential cube you can get out of what's really a fixed cube space in a distribution center if you optimize where you put every box so it fits together more like a puzzle. And of course, the system's tracking where everything is. Then you've got technologies like voice recognition to confirm picks. So it might tell you, go to bin location 4120, and you get there and you read the check digits, -101, and that confirms that you're in the right location. Or you can confirm check digits on SKUs. And of course, we talked about robotics in warehouses. You can also use these systems to do better maintenance of your equipment because they can predict when things are going to fail, like vending machines and HVAC systems. And of course, things like delivery vehicles and routing that are predicting weather and traffic delays and doing dynamic rerouting can also be very helpful.
Yeah, Ian, this slide reminds me of a profile that Elizabeth wrote about 6 months ago of Juergens Industrial Supply, an MRO distributor out of Cleveland. And about a year and a half ago or so, they launched a Wi-Fi enabled button. They called it JIS Express. And what it was on their, they do a fair amount of inventory management for their customers. And what they launched was basically a button that was on the inventory shelves on the actual product bins or product area for specific products. And when a customer wanted to reorder, similar to Amazon's dash button in the consumer market, they could just hit that button and it was an automatic reorder. My question to you is that an AI application, a machine learning? Where does that slot in?
Yeah, no, it's a related technology though, because there's something that some people refer to as Internet 4.0, which is machines talking to machines and then communicating across the internet between each other. Because a lot of vending machines will self-order off of the ERP, and that's really how these Juergens buttons work. They're a really interesting example because they're a lot cheaper than a vending machine, and I think they're actually making them for other distributors now, right?
I believe so.
Yeah. So it's actually a Wi-Fi application, as I recall, but it's a relatively low-tech, low-cost, but very useful way of reordering product that leverages Internet 4.0 with machine-to-machine communication. And so while that technology itself doesn't rely on AI, the reality is that Internet 4.0 includes the integration of these technologies. So, not everything that is advanced technology needs to be AI enabled in order to make a really important contribution to the system or the network. And that's a great example of something that can be, tied in. And by the way, it still feeds that data into an AI enabled inventory forecast. The product may be delivered on a truck that's routed by AI. So these systems are all integrated. In that particular example, it's just sort of a really innovative, low-cost way of leveraging machine-to-machine Internet of Things technology with, and those are going to play a role just like AI will in Internet 4.0.
Yeah, the takeaway for me was that AI seems to still have this sort of magical buzz around it, that this is really for companies that have requires a lot of investment and I guess capacity internally to be able to implement it. Why I like this example is it's a great example of, like you said, it's a relatively low-tech application, but leverages the Internet of Things essentially to provide a really good solution for particularly smaller customers in this case. So it really speaks to this doesn't have a high hurdle at this point. There's a lot of different points to enter this and start out.
Yeah, we should probably do a glossary of advanced technology for distributors because these are all mysterious terms, or in some cases they make people roll their eyes, like big data. What is that? Well, these concepts aren't that hard to understand at the level that executives need to understand them. Okay, so AI is technology that gets smarter and better at its task on its own. There is no AI if there's not machine learning in it, right? So they're not different technologies. Machine learning is the part of AI that enables it to be smart and it enables it to learn. Big data is just the data that you feed into those machine learning algorithms so they can learn and get better, right? So big data doesn't have a size meaning. It just means that you want to use a lot of data because the more data you feed those that's relevant, that you receive those, feed those machine learning algorithms, the more artificially intelligent the model gets. So it's really a simple system that gets made confusing because people will throw out things like, well, then what's deep learning? Well, Deep learning is just one form of machine learning algorithm. It's not that complicated. They're not different concepts. You'll see those presented as like nested circles. That's not how it works. And I think, Internet of Things, I just described, and, but I think, these concepts are often explained in very complicated terms, often by people who either don't understand them, so they're explaining them wrong, or they understand them at a level that's well beyond what executives need to know. And at the same time, there are competitors like Amazon Business who are applying all these concepts who do understand them well, but there are many competitors of theirs who are introducing lower and lower cost versions of this technology, and it's really essential that distribution executives understand this stuff at least at a deep enough level to grasp the concepts and the potential benefits they can get from them. Okay, asset protection. So I already mentioned the first bullet about sort of outliers in customer behavior, but also as employee behavior. So for example, in retail, one of the things they use those cameras for that above the registers is that if a cashier is processing a return and there's not a customer present, it'll alert security. Okay, but you can also use them for things like checking to make sure employees are wearing safety gear, right? So both for primarily for the safety of your employees, but also for OSHA reasons and liability reasons, you don't want employees without their safety vest or goggles or hard hats or whatever, and this AI can notify you if there's an employee who walks into a specific area without wearing goggles, for example. I mentioned sort of watch list, similar to the first example, you can develop a watch list of customers or other individuals and notify security if they enter your branches. That's a real big brother thing because it's facial recognition. I'm not endorsing it, I'm just telling you that's possible. And then, of course, AI is getting smarter and smarter all the time at detecting fraudulent transactions by looking at aberrations in customer behavior related to specific transactions, et cetera. Okay, so back to big data. So, big data, and there's a great book on this. If you email me, I'll send you the link to Amazon. But the concept here, really what's changed versus traditional data sets are that, first of all, like when I started out in the corporate world, whenever we wanted to, sort of understand a huge amount of data, we would look for some representative sample of it. So we'd find this small slice, we try to get it as representative as it could be. We'd make sure it was pristine, so we might try to understand what kinds of customers were buying, power transmission products. And, so we'd take, 100 transactions from 50 branches that we thought were representative, and from that we'd imply the customer demographics for everybody who bought power transmission from us. We don't have to do that anymore. So, and this is really thanks to enormous changes in processing power and memory, and the cost of that all coming down by enormous amounts. You can just take the entire data set, whatever it is. I mean, you could probably take the entire history of Grainger's recorded transactions and put it into a single server and apply analytics against it, and it wouldn't even make the server slow down. I mean, there's so much data available. And the other thing is it doesn't have to be pristine anymore because it understands how to identify outliers, how to ignore the messiness and get past it. But another thing that's really important is that very often the unintended uses of the data are more valuable than what the data was originally made for. So there's an example on the screen, which is that this product is showing that there's a buying trend notification. So something changed in these buyers. There's something different. So they set limits around their purchasing, an upper limit, a lower limit, and then there was a transaction that went above the limit, or there was a lack of transaction that went below it, and so it's setting an alert. Well, you didn't originally create these transactions so that you could alert your salespeople when some outlier happened. You created these transaction records so you could bill the customer properly and reconcile the payment, right? But now you found this other use for the data. Now all of us use this every day, like when you're using Waze or Google Maps to navigate. Where that data is coming from is from all the other drivers' cell phones. And as those cell phones switch towers, and then those data providers can estimate how many cars are between those towers and how fast they're going, right? And so if there's a lot of them and they're going slow, they make that portion of the road look red and they navigate you to an alternate route. Well, nobody designed cell phones to switch from tower to tower so that they could later help you get to your kid's soccer match on time. That's just a side benefit that's enormously useful to all of us, and it's really important for, I think, for distributors to have a general data strategy, but they also should sit down and talk about, hey, let's look at all the data we have. What's the customer data we have, the product data we have, the employee data we have? How can we use this to get business benefits? What could we know if we tracked it and measured it? And I've seen some really impressive examples over the years of how people have done that. Okay, a couple of other terms. I already talked about machine learning. It's just embedded into AI to make it work. Deep learning, which is often confused, is just one form of deep learning. There's, I don't know, dozens and dozens, probably hundreds of types of machine learning algorithms. Deep learning is often called out because it's one of the ones that thinks most like a human does or operates most like human thinking. But these aren't nested bubbles with AI as the big one and machine learning as the next one and deep learning inside of it. They're all integrated. AI. There is no AI without machine learning, but deep learning is just one of the ways one of the types of algorithms that machine learning uses, and it's important to understand that. Augmented reality is when you have technology that overlays, some graphics onto a real scene, right? So there's a BMW video where a technician opens the car. His virtual goggles, show him which bolts to remove and which parts to remove. And that's becoming more and more common now. So you can even in retail, there's a kind of wine called 19 Crimes, and if you download the Living Wines app and you hold your camera in front of the label comes to life. It really freaks some people out, and that's kind of a parlor trick, right? And it's just a marketing thing. But imagine when your customers' technicians are using, either a tablet like this, or they're using augmented reality enabled goggles to follow work instructions. And by the way, the parts that came in for the work instructions were ordered automatically by the machine that needed the maintenance, and were delivered by an autonomous vehicle. And the technician just picked up the work instructions, which, by the way, hopefully appear on the screen as well. And so AI is enabling all this stuff. Imagine how productive that is for the customer. The question is, how long is it going to be before you can offer that set of benefits? Because this stuff isn't 10 years away. Some of it's happening now. And organizations like Amazon Business are most likely going to offer that whole solution that I just described within the next few years. And then the Internet of Things, obviously, we talked about, which is machines and devices communicating with each other. Okay, so I think one of the challenges for distributors is that the gap between companies like Amazon Business and traditional distributors is expanding in terms of technology. And customers are encountering these AI benefits. They're ordering off their phone by voice or using the camera. More and more, they've got Alexa for Business now that's already enabled to order basic office supplies, et cetera. I mean, those consumer experiences create B2B expectations. And, the good news is that competitors to Amazon, like Google, Microsoft, et cetera, are developing, and many others are developing alternative technologies, right? But if you don't have a good platform and the experts who know how to use it, then you don't even have a strategy today. So how long is it going to be? I mean, you can be a fast follower, you can't be a slow follower or a non-follower. And I think distributors must determine the level of AI their customers need through research, but that's got to be ongoing research. Right now, millennials are the largest generation in the workforce. That is a digital native generation. They don't know what it's like to grow up without the internet. They're the ones defining expectations, and Generation Z right behind them is going to have even higher expectations. And so people can generalize and make comments about millennials and Gen Z all they want, but those are your customers, so you might want to understand them and build to their needs.
So Ian, around this challenges here, and every time we do a program around technology, we always talk about the other side of the coin, which is any piece of this requires some amount of change management and culture change, particularly when some of these technologies are, we talked about big data, AI, some of these have a pretty steep learning curve. So talk a little bit about, how do you internally sort of either sell the benefits? Who's going to be driving this? Is it from the top down? Is it a champion in the company? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think, these are capabilities that are going to be transformational in terms of the benefits they offer customers and how they affect customers' expectations. And I was around, because I'm old now, but I was around when the internet came out. I was working for a distribution company, and I happened to work for one that really got what was happening with e-commerce. But even today, there are executives who don't think that their company is ever going to be affected by the internet, or not in their lifetimes, or not in a fundamental way, because our product is different, our customers are different, and it really takes vision at the top and some level of comprehension, because it's going to require strategic change and strategic investment, and only the senior executives can drive that. And the problem with some of these technologies is you don't get a return right away. So it's not like, I can figure out what the return's going to be on building a warehouse or a branch or forklifts or trucks. I mean, some of this is uncertain. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't have a certain part of your budget that you set aside for exploring these things. I mean, I read a lot of 10Ks that are filed by publicly held distributors, and it's interesting to me that many of them have a statement like, we did not spend an appreciable amount on R&D last year. And then you read Amazon's 10K, and they are, by some measures, the number one spender of R&D in the entire world. Now, not all of that, obviously, is on distribution or related things like retail, but a lot of the stuff they spend in other areas winds up getting applied in technology that benefits business buyers. And so I think leaders have to understand that, look, you have to have a certain amount of technology fluency that maybe you didn't ever have to have before if you want to craft successful forward-looking business strategies. And I think these are the basic requirements. You need experts, right? So you need to, if you're the CEO and you don't understand these concepts, well, you better learn them yourself, or probably better, hire someone who really understands them. And you need a real practical, applied understanding, because some of the experts you hire want to go build their fantasy projects, and that's not useful either, right? How do you apply these to customer benefits? So you need to analyze the competition, including people who are digitally ahead of you, and distributors who may even be in different verticals, right? But they are in verticals that have applied these technologies sooner. You've got to build, maintain, and improve your capabilities forever. It's never going to stop. That has to be built on a robust core platform, right? So if you don't have an up-to-speed ERP that can easily integrate a bunch of leading-edge applications, then that's a problem, right? Because you're not going to be able to apply this technology, because it's going to depend on you having a state-of-the-art platform to attach it to. Some more and more distributors are putting in place data czars, right? They may not call it that, but someone who's responsible for data. I mean, we have a friend, John Walker, who writes for us sometimes, and he says, you should manage your data with the same rigor you apply to managing your inventory. And imagine if you paid that much attention to it, and you were that rigorous about making sure everything was fully attributed and up to date, and you knew where all the data was, and you were careful about how you used it, and you spent money on acquiring it and polishing it up and applying it. I mean, that is really an important thing to prepare for the future, because like I said earlier, Amazon's applying, hey, here's an image, I can interpret what that means in a SKU. Some distributors, you can't even find the SKU on their websites unless you search for an exact term. And then, of course, there are other applications like pricing, but also PIM, which is product information management, customer database, business intelligence systems, et cetera. So there's a lot to learn.
Yeah, and as you break it out across these categories here, the first thing that comes to mind for me is if you're a distributor just starting out on this, maybe a data analyst is the first place to start, and then at some point a little bit higher level data scientist. I'm trying to think about how this cuts out, because at one level this isn't about bringing in sort of high level particularly if you're just starting out on this and starting to develop some capabilities, it feels to me like there's a lot of trench work, sort of more core understanding in terms of a technician than a strategist. What's your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it kind of depends on who you've already got. I mean, I think if you have a really low level IQ on this stuff, or then you need an expert in there, and that person's not going to be a data analyst. It's going to be someone more senior. Mm-hmm. A lot of times when I go talk to distributors, though, very often the CEO, some CEOs are very literate on this stuff. I'm not trying to bash CEOs generally. But it's more likely that there's a person who reports into the CEO who's really fascinated with this stuff. Often it's the CIO, it might be the CFO, it might be a VP of operations, but there's somebody who's already thinking about this stuff, and there are some of those people on this webinar right now, right? And I think giving that person the lead in sort of building out the strategy, and then letting them decide, okay, what's the next place to add talent. And that person might say, I feel like I've got the strategy, but I sure could use a data scientist to help me work through some specifics. So it's probably situation specific, but I think you have to get to a pretty high level strategic understanding in your organization pretty quickly. Okay, so for some insight on this stuff, you should definitely attend our Digital Distributor Summit. That's June 18th through 20th here in Denver, Colorado. We have some great speakers, including Dr. Michael Wu, who is the Chief AI Strategist for Pro Software, who will be speaking. You can register at digital.mdm.com or look at the agenda. So we'd love to see you there. And I will now turn it back over to Elizabeth and Tom for questions.
Thanks, Ian. That was wonderful. Thanks for sharing with us. We do have time for a couple questions. As a reminder, to ask a question, you can type it into the chat window on the lower left of your screen and then hit the return key. Let's see. I've got a question to start here. So can you talk a little bit about privacy issues when dealing with AI, be it with the end users or customers or even internal employees? I know you mentioned some camera monitoring, or any legal issues with targeting your market dynamics a little too well, like getting in trouble with price gouging if a hurricane is coming?
Yeah, well, a lawyer probably asked that question. I think these laws are all changing. I mean, there's not a lot of legislation, or a lot of case law for people to look to, and it's changing all the time. I would say, you got to have somebody who's a lawyer review the applications of AI, right? And it is very easy for it to get too intrusive. Facebook's about to pay supposedly a multi-billion-dollar penalty for abusing user data. And so, just because you can do it doesn't mean that you should. I chose not to speak to the ethical issues in this presentation, and really just speak to the potential of the technology. What I would say is that you kind of know when you're getting on shaky ground. So if you're doing things like facial recognition, or you are using more than your own data to understand your customers, like you start going after their Facebook profiles, which some people can do, and start pulling in information, then you need to be really careful. And I would say if you're limiting your analysis to your own data, and some general third-party databases that are accessible to everybody, you're probably going to be okay. But since the capabilities of AI keep expanding, nobody really knows how what it's going to be able to figure out tomorrow. So I would say if you feel like you're on shaky ground, consult an attorney who understands this stuff, because it's really not my expertise.
Yeah, the context that I find interesting to this is, it was a year ago, May, that the GDPR, the European data privacy regulations went into effect. And while that was immediately applicable to media companies in particular, but it really it impacted every company in terms of how they treated customer and information that they collected by email, by the internet. And now this year, that there's similar California regulations coming into play that I know we're going to be talking about in upcoming MDM a little bit more. But to me, it's an indication just how early it is in terms of how these types of privacy issues are being regulated. But I think here over the next 12 to 24 months, you're going to see a whole lot more very quickly.
Yeah, and it does vary by state. I mean, I'm glad you mentioned California. I know one company, and they only sent, I don't know, half a dozen text messages to a customer who had opted out and got fined, like a 7-figure fine. So don't send text messages to customers in California unless you know exactly what you're doing.
That actually kind of relates to our next question. So people sometimes worry about automation or AI taking over in a way that makes them lose touch with their customers in the process of their business and kind of their value proposition. But you mentioned some ways that it can actually take the pulse of customer impressions for your business. Can you expand on that a bit and maybe how distributors can best take advantage of such features?
Yeah, I think, the reality is that you can't be entirely data-driven without and understand customers, in my view, right? I think, there's a lot of data in there, and you can attach to outside databases. You can make a lot of inferences based on those correlations and do a lot of good things in terms of being very, very relevant for individual offers to customers. But if you want to understand what customers think of your brand, you have to go make sales calls or work sales counter or answer phones, or if you are fully automated online, then you better call customers yourself because the brand is defined where the company touches the customer. I think you have to add some human-to-human interaction, whether it's preferably in person but over the phone, to provide an additional angle or lens to look through for your customer relationships.
Well, we're right about at the end of the hour, so we're going to end with that question. I hope you all enjoyed our program today and that it proved helpful to you. Ian and Tom, thank you again. We'd also like to thank Epicor for its sponsorship of this program today. We will be sending a link to access a recording of their program to you all, so please feel free to share it with your colleagues. And thank you for joining us today. This concludes the program.